My daughter's fiancé demanded $50K or no wedding. I froze his account at my bank instead. It happened on a Tuesday, a day that felt no different from any other. My daughter, Emily, was glowing. For months, our home had been filled with the happy chaos of wedding planning. Her fiancé, Spencer, seemed like the perfect match. He was charming, ambitious, and he looked at Emily like she was the only person in the world. I was happy for her. As a father, that's all you ever want. My wife, Diane, and I had already paid for the venue, the caterer, and Emily's beautiful dress. We were all in. My daughter's fiancé demanded $50K or no wedding. I froze his account at my bank instead. Subscribe and leave a like to see how this dramatic showdown unfolds. That evening, Spencer asked to speak with me alone in my study. I thought he wanted to talk about the final details, or maybe just share a moment of gratitude. I offered him a seat and he sat on the edge of the chair, his usual easy smile gone. He looked nervous. He cleared his throat and said the words that shattered the perfect picture I had in my head. He explained he had some unexpected business debts, and that he needed $50,000 to clear them before the wedding. He said it was a test of my commitment to him joining our family. I stared at him, trying to process it. A test? It sounded more like a threat. I told him calmly that we had already invested a huge amount into the wedding and that a demand like this was completely out of line. His face hardened. The charming mask slipped away, revealing something cold and ugly underneath. "No money, no wedding, Thomas," he said, using my first name with a shocking lack of respect. "And I'll make sure Emily knows it was your fault, that you were too cheap to secure her happiness." He stood up, confident he had won, and left me sitting there in stunned silence. For the rest of the night, my mind raced. This wasn't a man in trouble asking for help. This was blackmail. He was using my daughter's heart as a weapon against me. I felt a cold anger build inside me, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. I am the senior vice president of operations at a major national bank, and as fate would have it, Spencer banked with us. I remembered helping him open a premium account a year ago, a gesture of welcome to the family. He had bragged about his impressive portfolio, but I never had a reason to look into it, until now. The next morning, I went to work before anyone else. I didn't break any major laws, but I did use my high-level access to flag an account for an internal review. His account. I told my compliance officer, a trusted colleague named Walter, that I had reason to believe the account holder was involved in some questionable activities, possibly a small-scale scam. That was enough to trigger a temporary hold. It wasn't a lie either. Blackmailing your future father-in-law felt pretty questionable to me. Walter agreed. The pattern of recent cash withdrawals and transfers looked strange enough to warrant a security freeze pending investigation. 2 days passed. It was the Friday before the wedding. My phone rang. It was Spencer, and he was screaming. His cards were being declined everywhere. He couldn't access a single dollar. "What did you do?" he yelled into the phone. I told him to come to my office at the bank if he wanted to talk. He was there in 20 minutes, his face red with rage. He stormed past my assistant and burst into my office. "You froze my account. You have no right," he shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet room. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him. The power had shifted completely. "Actually, Spencer, the bank has every right," I said calmly. "We detected some highly irregular activity. It seems you've been taking large deposits from several elderly individuals and then moving the money through multiple accounts. It has all the markers of a classic financial scam." His face went pale. He hadn't just been blackmailing me. He was a common thief preying on vulnerable people. The internal review had uncovered everything. It was worse than I could have imagined. He stammered, trying to deny it, but the proof was already on my screen. "The account will remain frozen," I continued, "pending a full investigation, which of course will be reported to the authorities." He sank into the chair opposite me, defeated. The fight was gone, replaced by pure panic. He begged. He pleaded. He said he would pay it all back, that he would call off the wedding quietly, that he would disappear. He offered to do anything if I just dropped the investigation. I just looked at him and said, "You should have thought of that before you tried to sell my daughter's happiness for $50,000. The hardest part was telling Emily. I went home that evening with a heavy heart, carrying a folder with all the evidence. She and Diane were in the living room, surrounded by wedding decorations. When I told her, she refused to believe me at first. She cried and accused me of trying to ruin her life. It broke my heart to see her in so much pain, but I calmly laid out the bank statements, the names of his victims, the whole ugly truth. She read through the documents, her tears slowly turning from sadness to disbelief and then to a quiet, firm anger. The wedding was officially called off the next morning. It was a painful time, but my daughter is strong. She healed, and she understood that I hadn't taken away her happiness. I had saved her from a lifetime of misery with a man who saw her as nothing more than a price tag. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of quiet and chaos. On the surface, our house was still. The constant ringing of the phone with wedding vendors had been replaced by the somber task of calling them back to cancel everything. Each call was a small, painful reminder of the disaster we had narrowly avoided. Diane handled most of it with a grim determination, protecting Emily from the administrative heartache. Emily herself was a portrait of quiet strength. She didn't shatter, but a part of her light had dimmed. I saw her staring out the window sometimes, not with sadness for Spencer, but with the confusion of someone who realizes the map they were following was a complete lie. The legal process against Spencer had begun, handled by the authorities. I had given my statement, as had Walter, and the bank's fraud department had handed over a mountain of evidence. I tried to step back, to let justice run its course. I thought, foolishly, that the worst was over. Then, one Monday morning, my phone buzzed with a message from the bank's public relations head. It was a link to an online article. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. Banking titan crushes future son-in-law over business disagreement, sources say. The article was a masterpiece of lies. It painted me as a possessive, power-mad father who never thought Spencer was good enough for Emily. It quoted anonymous friends of Spencer who claimed he had asked me for a simple business loan, and I had used my corporate power to destroy him in an act of personal vengeance. The $50,000 demand was twisted from blackmail into a reasonable request. Spencer was the victim, and I was the villain. He couldn't fight me with money, so he chose to fight me with mud, trying to ruin my reputation. My boss, a man named Christopher, called me into his office. He was a fair man, but he was also responsible for the bank's image. "Thomas, what is this?" he asked, pointing to the tablet on his desk. "Did you use company resources for a personal matter?" I calmly explained everything, from the blackmail to the evidence of widespread fraud that Walter had uncovered through official channels. I emphasized that my initial flag was based on a legitimate suspicion that proved correct. Walter backed my story completely. Christopher listened, his expression unreadable. "The bank will stand behind the fraud investigation," he finally said. "But you're under a microscope now. Don't give them any more ammunition." I went home that evening feeling the pressure mounting. I showed the article to Diane and Emily. Diane's face tightened with anger, but Emily's reaction surprised me. She read it, her eyes scanning the lines of poison, and then she looked up at me. The dim light I had missed was gone, replaced by a flicker of fire. "He's not just a thief, Dad," she said, her voice steady. "He's a coward. He's trying to hurt you because you caught him. We have to fight this." Her words were all the permission I needed. My fight was no longer just about defense. It was about dismantling a predator for good. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator, a sharp man named Frank. I didn't want dirt on Spencer. I wanted the truth about his victims. Frank was efficient. Within a week, he had names, addresses, and heartbreaking stories. I decided to start with the first name on the list, Eleanor, an 80-year-old widow who lived 2 towns over. She had lost her entire life savings, over $100,000. I drove to her small house on a Saturday morning, my heart heavy with a sense of responsibility. When Eleanor opened the door, she had kind, tired eyes. I introduced myself simply as someone who was also affected by Spencer's actions. At first, she was wary, ashamed to talk about it, but as I shared a part of my own story, about my daughter, she slowly opened up. She told me how Spencer, using a different name, had pretended to be a financial advisor helping seniors. He had been so kind, so trustworthy. "He even brought me flowers," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He said he would make sure I was safe in my old age." Listening to her, my anger solidified into a cold, hard purpose. This was bigger than my family. I left her house that day with a new plan. I wasn't just going to be a witness in a criminal case. I was going to be an advocate. I contacted a young, brilliant lawyer my firm sometimes used, a woman named Laura. I explained the situation, not just my part, but the stories of Eleanor and the others. I told her I would personally fund a class-action civil suit against Spencer on behalf of every single person he had scammed. "We're going to take back everything he stole," I said, "and everything he thinks he owns." Laura looked at the files, then at me, a determined smile on her face. "Let's get to work," she said. The combination of the state's criminal case and our civil lawsuit was an overwhelming force. Spencer had no money for a decent defense. The evidence was irrefutable. One by one, the victims Laura had gathered told their stories in court. Eleanor's testimony was powerful. She looked right at Spencer and described how he had stolen not just her money, but her trust in people. He couldn't even meet her gaze. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. In our civil case, the judge awarded the victims all of his remaining seized assets. It wasn't everything they had lost, but it was a symbol. It was justice. A few weeks after the sentencing, Emily and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset. The storm had passed. The ugly news articles were forgotten. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Emily said softly. "You didn't just get angry. You did something. You helped those people." I looked at my daughter, no longer a glowing bride-to-be, but a strong, wise woman forged in a fire she never should have faced. "He picked the wrong family to mess with," I replied. In that quiet moment, I knew we had won more than just a court case. We had taken a broken piece of our lives and built something stronger in its place. 6 months passed. The silence that at first felt like a wound slowly turned into a kind of peace. The seasons changed, and with them so did we. Spencer was a ghost, a name mentioned only in legal documents that arrived in the mail. Diane and I found our rhythm again, the easy comfort of a long marriage that had weathered a terrible storm. The real transformation, however, was in Emily. She started volunteering at a support center for victims of financial fraud, using her pain to help others navigate their own. The fragile girl who had cried in my arms was gone. In her place was a woman with a quiet, unbreakable strength. We were healing. We thought the story was over. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, a small, unmarked box arrived. It was addressed to Emily. I saw it on the porch and felt a prickle of unease. There was no return address. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single, pressed gardenia, brown at the edges. It was the same type of flower Eleanor had told me Spencer used to bring her. It was a message from the grave, a piece of calculated cruelty. Emily stared at it, her face pale. "Who would do this?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, but the cold anger I thought I had buried began to stir again. That night, Diane and I spoke in low voices after Emily had gone to bed. "It's one of his friends, Thomas," she said, her hands clenched. "Someone from those horrible articles trying to be clever." I wanted to believe her, to dismiss it as a pathetic, final act from a defeated enemy's supporters. But it felt different. It felt too personal, too precise. The next morning, I called Frank, the private investigator. "I know the case is closed," I said, "but I need you to look into something for me. See if Spencer had any close associates who might hold a grudge." Frank called back 2 days later. He had spoken to a few low-level contacts who knew of Spencer's scams. "Most of them are rats scurrying for cover," Frank said. "But one name keeps popping up. A guy who was never on the police's radar. A man named Michael. The rumor is he was Spencer's silent partner, the one who found the targets and laundered the money. He's smart, careful, and he disappeared the second Spencer got arrested. The name hung in the air, a shadow I didn't know we had. Michael, a ghost with a name." The next escalation came quickly. I left my office at the bank late one evening. When I got to my car in the secure executive garage, I found all 4 tires slashed. The cuts were deep and clean. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a message delivered where I was supposed to feel safest. It was a violation meant to show me they could get to me anywhere. I called the police, filed a report, but I knew it was useless. The piece was officially over. We were being hunted, and I had no idea what the predator wanted. The answer came the following day. My private line at the office rang, a number only a handful of people had. A calm, level voice spoke on the other end without introduction. "You've been ignoring the messages, Thomas. That's not wise." It was Michael. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a businessman discussing a transaction. "Spencer was holding something for me, something that belongs to me, a small black leather journal. He was sentimental. I'm sure he gave it to your daughter. I want it back. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. It wasn't about revenge. It was about money. Spencer had left behind a loose end, and we were tangled in it. I went straight home and told Diane and Emily everything. Fear was in the room, thick and suffocating, but beneath it, something else was present. Resolve. Emily's eyes, which had once been filled with tears, were now sharp with focus. "A journal," she said, and a look of recognition crossed her face. She went to her room and came back with a box of things she had been unable to throw away. At the bottom was a small black moleskin journal. Spencer had given it to her on their 3-month anniversary. He said it was where he wrote his dreams, she said with disgust. We opened it together. The pages were filled with what looked like gibberish, rambling notes about markets, strange poems, and strings of numbers. It meant nothing to us. I took photos of several pages and sent them to Frank. He called me back within the hour. "This isn't a dream journal, Thomas. It's a cipher, a key. These are almost certainly the codes and routes to hidden offshore accounts. This is the whole playbook." Frank's voice was grim. "Whatever you do, don't give it to him. A man like Michael won't just take the book and walk away. He'll erase the witnesses." Standing there in our living room, the 3 of us made a decision. We had been victims once. We would not be victims again. Spencer had preyed on the weak. This new ghost, Michael, thought we were weak too. He thought he could scare a father, a mother, and a heartbroken daughter into submission. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and called the number Michael had used. When he answered, I said calmly, "We don't have what you're looking for." I hung up before he could respond. The trap was now set. We weren't just waiting for the hunter anymore. We were building a cage for him. Hanging up the phone felt like closing a door on our old lives. The silence in the living room was heavy, filled with everything we weren't saying. Diane was holding Emily's hand, her knuckles white. Emily wasn't crying. Her eyes were fixed on the small black journal on the coffee table as if it were a snake. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with a hard, sharp anger. We had been pushed, and now we were pushing back. "He thinks he can scare us," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper, but full of steel. "He thinks we're just another one of his victims." She looked at me, and I saw a reflection of my own resolve. "He's wrong," I said. "The first step was to understand our weapon. The journal was useless to us as a book of nonsense. Frank, the PI, knew a man. His name is Howard," Frank said over the phone. "Used to work for the government, breaking codes. He's old school, lives quietly now. If anyone can make sense of that book, it's him." I agreed immediately. Frank arranged to pick up the journal the next next morning, handling it with gloves like a piece of evidence. I felt a small bit of relief, like we had finally passed the ball to someone who knew how to play the game. But Michael wasn't going to wait patiently. The next day, a text message arrived on my phone from an unknown number. It was a single photo. Emily, walking into the support center where she volunteered, seen from across the street. There was no text, just the image. It was a clear, terrifying message. I see her. I can get to her. That night, nobody slept. I sat in my study. The picture burned into my mind. Diane made coffee at 2 a.m., and we just sat in the kitchen, not talking. We had installed a new security system, but it felt like putting a bandage on a broken bone. The threat wasn't trying to get in. It was already all around us. Emily refused to stop her volunteer work. If I hide Dad, he wins. I won't let him take that from me, too. Her bravery was both my greatest pride and my deepest fear. The following afternoon, Howard called. "I think I have something," he said, his voice crackling with excitement. "It's not a standard cipher. It's personal. The key isn't a number. It's a memory." He explained that the strings of numbers were coordinates and transaction dates, but they were all scrambled based on a repeating keyword. He needed a word or phrase that was deeply personal to Spencer. We all sat around the speakerphone thinking, what did he always say? What was important to him? Emily's face suddenly went blank. "Oh my God," she whispered. "His first dog, Barnaby. He told me he cried for a week when it ran away. He said it was the first thing he ever truly loved." It seemed so random, so childish. I relayed the name to Howard. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "That's it," Howard said, his voice filled with awe. "The whole thing just unlocked. Thomas, this is bigger than you know." What the journal revealed was staggering. It was a detailed ledger of a massive money laundering operation. Spencer's scams were just the tip of the iceberg, the seed money. Michael was moving millions for powerful, dangerous people. The journal had names, bank routes, and safe deposit box locations across the country. We now held the keys to a criminal kingdom. This was far beyond a private investigator and a few worried family members. This was a federal case. I immediately called my boss, Christopher. I laid everything out for him, the threats, the journal, the decoded information. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a steely look I knew well. "The bank will not be intimidated, Thomas," he said. "We protect our own. We're going to use every resource we have. We're setting the trap." The plan was simple, but dangerous. We would give Michael what he wanted. I called him back on a secure recorded line, my voice steady. "I have your book," I said. "I want this to be over. You can have it. Name the place." He chose an abandoned warehouse district by the old port, a classic movie villain move. He wanted neutral ground where he felt in control. The meeting was set for the next night. For 24 hours, our house was a quiet hub of activity. Frank coordinated with a federal task force that Christopher had brought in. They were led by a sharp, no-nonsense agent named Gregory. He assured me Emily and Diane would be safe, moved to a secure location until it was over. The hardest part was saying goodbye to them, not knowing for sure what would happen next. I stood in the dusty, cavernous warehouse, a perfect replica of the journal in my hand. The place smelled of rust and decay. I was wired for sound, with dozens of agents hidden in the shadows around the building. Michael stepped out from behind a stack of rotting pallets. He was average, unremarkable, the kind of man you'd never look at twice. That was the secret to his success. "You made the wise choice, Thomas," he said, his voice calm. He walked forward, hand outstretched for the book. I tossed it to him. He caught it and flipped through the pages, a small smile on his face. "Pleasure doing business with you." He turned to leave. "You know," I said, my voice echoing in the vast space. The keyword was Barnaby, the name of his dog. "A little sentimental for a man like you, don't you think?" Michael froze. His head snapped back toward me, the smile gone, replaced by pure, cold rage. That was the signal. The doors crashed open, floodlights blinded him, and the warehouse filled with the shouts of federal agents. It was over. In the end, it was a ghost from a childhood memory that brought down an empire. The moment the floodlights hit, the world exploded into noise and motion. Men in tactical gear swarmed from the shadows, shouting commands that echoed off the high metal ceiling. Michael didn't even try to run. He just stood there, bathed in the harsh white light, his face a mask of disbelief turning into pure hatred. He dropped the fake journal as his hands were forced behind his back. Agent Gregory appeared at my side, his expression all business. "You did good, Thomas," he said, his voice a low rumble in the chaos. "We got him. It's over." But as I watched them lead Michael away, a cold feeling told me that this wasn't the end. It was just the end of a chapter. This ghost had friends, and ghosts always leave shadows behind. The drive to the secure location where Diane and Emily were waiting was the longest of my life. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I just stared out the window at the blurry city lights, my mind empty. When we arrived, an agent led me down a quiet hallway to a plain-looking hotel room door. I took a deep breath and knocked. The door flew open. Diane and Emily were there, their faces pale with worry. The second they saw me, whole and unharmed, the tension broke. We collapsed into a hug, a tangle of arms and tears, the three of us holding on as if the world might fall apart if we let go. For the first time in weeks, I felt the knot of fear in my chest finally begin to loosen. We were safe. We were together. We spent the next week in a federally protected apartment, a place with no name and no view. It felt like living in a bubble, disconnected from our real lives. Gregory visited daily, bringing updates. Michael wasn't talking, but the real journal was a goldmine. He was the operational manager for a very powerful, very private syndicate, Gregory explained one afternoon, sitting at our small dining table. These aren't street thugs, Thomas. They're businessmen, politicians, people with pristine public images. You've kicked over a hornet's nest. He told us we would have to testify. Our old lives were gone, at least for now. We were now witnesses, pieces in a much larger game. The next move from the enemy came not with a slashed tire, but with a business card. A man named Kenneth, a lawyer with a smile as slick as his hair, showed up at the bank asking for a meeting with my boss, Christopher. He claimed to represent a group of concerned investors who were affected by the unfortunate situation with Michael. Christopher met with him, with me listening in on a speakerphone. Kenneth's voice was smooth as silk. My clients believe this whole affair is a misunderstanding, he said. They feel that Mr. Thomas's family has been through enough. They're prepared to offer a generous settlement to help them relocate and start over, in exchange for a simple statement saying the journal's contents were misunderstood. It wasn't an offer. It was a threat wrapped in a legal document. The message was clear. Take the money and disappear, or face the consequences. But the threat wasn't to our lives anymore, not directly. It was a threat to our reputations, our careers, our future. They would try to bury us in court, paint me as a disgruntled employee who faked evidence and Emily as a scorned woman seeking revenge. They would use their immense wealth and influence to crush us into silence. Frank's investigation found that Kenneth was a notorious fixer, a man who cleaned up messes for the ultra-rich. He didn't break laws. He twisted them into shapes that served his clients. He was more dangerous than a man with a weapon because his battlefield was the courtroom and the media. That night, I laid everything out for Diane and Emily. I told them about Kenneth's offer, the implied threats, and the long, ugly fight that lay ahead if we refused. I gave them the choice. We can take the money, I said, my voice heavy. We can leave, start somewhere new where no one knows us. No one would blame us. Diane looked at me, her eyes clear and steady. She didn't hesitate. They don't get to win, Thomas. Not after what they put us through. Then Emily spoke, and her voice was filled with a strength I had never heard before. Spencer thought I was weak. Michael thought we were weak. These new people, they think the same thing. I'm tired of being afraid. I want them to see what happens when they pick the wrong family. In that moment, sitting in that sterile, anonymous apartment, we were more united than ever. We had been tested by threats, fear, and heartbreak. Spencer had tried to break our family for $50,000. Michael had tried to tear us apart for a book of secrets. Now, faceless men in expensive suits were trying to buy our silence. Each time, they underestimated us. They saw a banker, a wife, and a heartbroken girl. They didn't see the father, the mother, and the daughter who had walked through fire together and refused to get burned. I picked up the phone and called Agent Gregory. Tell the prosecutor we're ready, I said. We're not running. We're going to testify. The cage was built for Michael, but now I realized we had to help build a bigger one for the whole rotten zoo. The phone call to Agent Gregory felt like closing one door and stepping through another into a long, dark hallway. The immediate threat of Michael was gone, but the shadows he cast were longer and colder than I could have imagined. Our decision to testify wasn't a moment of victory. It was a declaration of war. A war we had no idea how to fight. The days that followed were a blur of legal briefings. We were moved from the anonymous apartment to a secure suburban house, another cage, just with a small backyard. We met the man who would lead our charge, a federal prosecutor named Peter. He was a man in his late 40s with tired eyes but a firm handshake. He didn't offer false hope or easy promises. They will not fight you in a warehouse, Peter told us during our first meeting, his voice calm and even. Their weapons are money and influence. They will try to destroy your credibility before you ever set foot in a courtroom. They will paint you as liars, opportunists, or worse. You need to be ready for that. He looked directly at Emily. Especially you. They will portray you as a woman scorned. It will be ugly. Emily just nodded, her jaw set. The girl who had cried over a broken engagement was gone. In her place was a woman who had stared into the darkness and hadn't blinked. Let them try, she said, and I had never been prouder. The first attack came a week later. It wasn't a rock through a window, but an article on a popular news website. Frank, our PI, sent me the link with a simple message. It started. The headline was a punch to the gut. Bank executive's family in bizarre revenge plot against wealthy businessman. The article, quoting anonymous sources, spun a disgusting tale. It claimed Spencer had ended the engagement for legitimate reasons and that I, a disgruntled father, had fabricated the journal with my unstable daughter to ruin his life. They used my position at the bank to suggest I had the means to create fake financial records. Every word was a carefully crafted lie designed to plant a seed of doubt in the public mind. He threatened to ruin Emily's happiness and called me cheap. What would you do if your daughter's future was held hostage? Comment below and share your thoughts. Reading it felt like being covered in filth. Diane threw her phone across the room. Emily just sat there, her face pale, reading reading and rereading the comment section, where strangers were calling her horrible names. I went to her, wanting to say something, anything, to make it better, but the words wouldn't come. What do you say when the world is being told you are a monster? That night I called Christopher my boss. I expected him to be worried about the bank's reputation. Instead, his voice was cold with anger. "This is Kenneth's work," he said. "Slick, nasty, and just on the edge of libel. Don't worry, Thomas. We're not sitting back. The bank is releasing a statement." The next morning, the bank did just that. It was a short, powerful statement expressing full confidence in me as an employee and stating they were cooperating fully with a federal investigation into serious financial crimes. It didn't mention Spencer or Michael by name, but it didn't have to. It was a shot across the bow. It told Kenneth and his clients that we weren't a family standing alone. We had the weight of a major financial institution behind us. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. It gave us a moment to breathe in a room that was quickly running out of air. A few days later, Peter called us in for another meeting. On the table between us was a stack of files. "Kenneth's strategy is clear," he said. "He wants to bury us in motions and legal challenges before we even get to a trial. He's filed a civil suit against you, Thomas, for defamation and theft of private property, the Journal." I just stared at him. They were suing me. "It's a classic intimidation tactic," Peter continued unfazed, "designed to drain your resources and your will to fight. We will handle it. But they also did something else. They've subpoenaed your friends, your co-workers, even distant relatives of Diane's. They are looking for dirt. Anyone who has ever had a grudge against you, they will find them and put them on a witness list. The syndicate wasn't just attacking our story. They were trying to dismantle our lives piece by piece. They were turning our past into a weapon against us. I thought about all the people we knew, the casual disagreements, the small fallings out over the years. In the hands of a man like Kenneth, any of those moments could be twisted into something ugly. I looked at Diane and Emily. The fight wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. The battlefield was our entire history, and the enemy was digging through it, looking for bones to break. We were no longer just witnesses. We were the case, and everything we had ever been was now evidence. The silence in the safe house was the heaviest thing I'd ever known. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the tense, listening quiet of an animal hiding from a predator. Every car that passed on the distant street, every creak of the floorboards felt like a threat. We were living in limbo, cut off from everything that had once been our lives. The legal briefings with Peter were our only connection to the war being waged in our name. We were the central figures, yet we felt like ghosts, watching from behind a one-way mirror as our old world was picked apart by vultures. The next blow landed on a Thursday afternoon. I was watching Emily read a book, marveling at the focus she could find in the middle of this storm. Diane was on the phone in the other room, keeping her voice low. At first I assumed she was talking to one of the agents, but then I heard her voice crack, a small, sharp sound of distress. "No, they can't do that. That was 10 years ago." I put my newspaper down. Emily looked up from her book, her eyes wide with the same alarm I felt. Diane appeared in the doorway, the cordless phone clutched in her hand, her face ashen. "That was my sister," she whispered. Her sister, Carolyn, lived 3 states away. They weren't close, not since a bitter argument over their parents' inheritance years ago, but they were still family. Diane sank onto the sofa next to me. "Kenneth's people found her," she said, her voice trembling. "They served her with a subpoena. They questioned her for hours." She took a shaky breath. "They asked her about the inheritance fight. They twisted it, Thomas. They made it sound like I was greedy, manipulative. They asked if I had a history of exaggerating things to get my way. They tried to paint me as a liar." I pulled her close, my own anger a hot spike in my chest. This was Kenneth's strategy in action. It was brilliant and disgusting. He wasn't looking for facts. He was manufacturing a narrative. He was taking a private family wound, something painful and long buried, and sharpening it into a weapon to use against us in public. He would find every person we had ever disagreed with, every friend we had lost touch with, every minor dispute, and parade them in front of a jury and the media. He would build a collage of half-truths and out-of-context moments to create a picture of a deceitful, vindictive family. "They're poisoning the well," I said, the words tasting like ash. "They want to make sure that by the time we get to court, no one will believe a word we say." Diane started to cry softly, a sound of pure exhaustion and despair. "Carolyn believed them, Thomas. She thinks maybe we are doing something wrong. That was the cruelest cut of all. They weren't just turning strangers against us. They were turning our own family against us. They were isolating us completely, making us an island in a sea of suspicion." Just then, Emily stood up. She walked over and took the phone from her mother's hand, placing it back on its base with a firm click. The sound seemed to break the spell of despair in the room. "No," she said, her voice clear and hard. "We are not letting them do this." She looked from me to her mother. "They want us to feel alone. They want us to feel like our whole lives have been a lie. Fine, let them dig." She knelt in front of Diane. "Mom, who else do they know? Who are our real friends? The people who know who we really are? We need to call them. We need to warn them, and we need to ask them for help." I stared at my daughter. The fear was still in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective fire. She wasn't just enduring this. She was fighting back. She was thinking like a general, planning a counteroffensive while her parents were still reeling from the last attack. Spencer, Michael, Kenneth, they had all made the same mistake. They looked at Emily and saw a fragile girl. They never saw the steel that was forged in her mother's love and her father's protection. She was right. Hiding and waiting wasn't enough. We had to fight their narrative with our own. I picked up my phone and called Frank, our investigator. "Frank," I said, my voice steady now, borrowing strength from my daughter, "I have a new job for you. Forget digging for more dirt on them for a minute. I need you to do the opposite for us. I need a list of every person who can speak to our character. Old neighbors, my former employees, Diane's charity group, Emily's college professors, everyone. Kenneth is building an army of ghosts to haunt us. It's time we gathered an army of our own." The silence in the house was still there, but it felt different now. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the quiet before the storm we were about to unleash. The call with Frank ended, but the energy in the room had changed. My daughter's strength had been like a splash of cold water, waking Diane and me from a nightmare. We weren't just hiding anymore. We were preparing for battle. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. We turned the safe house's dining table into a war room. We pulled out old photo albums, yearbooks, and holiday card lists. Each name was a memory, a piece of the life Kenneth was trying to erase. We made 3 columns, definitely on our side, maybe, and probably against us. It was a painful but necessary task, dissecting our own history before the enemy could. Frank was a machine. He worked quietly and efficiently in the background, vetting the names we gave him. "Roger, your old VP of operations, he said he'd testify in a heartbeat. Called you the most honest man he ever worked with," Frank reported on a call. "And Professor Stanley from Emily's university, he remembers her clearly. Said any claim she's unstable is ridiculous and he's willing to write a sworn statement about her academic excellence and character." Each piece of good news was a small brick we used to rebuild our fortress. These weren't just names on a list. They were people who knew the truth of who we were. The hardest part fell to Diane. She had to make the calls to her closest friends. I watched her one afternoon as she sat by the window, phone in hand, steeling herself to contact a woman named Margaret, who she'd run a local food pantry with for years. "Margaret? It's Diane," she began, her voice quiet. I could only hear her side of the conversation, the pauses, the soft explanations. "Yes, what you read it's not true. It's complicated. They're trying to destroy us." She listened for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears, but then a small, relieved smile touched her lips. "Oh, Margaret, thank you. That means more than you know. Yes, we will." She hung up and looked at me, wiping a tear away. "She never doubted us for a second," Diane whispered. "She's already organizing a letter of support from the entire charity board." Just as we started to feel a flicker of hope, Kenneth struck again. This time, it was more vicious, more personal. A new article appeared, this time on a sleazy gossip blog. The headline was designed to cause maximum damage. "Exclusive audio. Bank exec Thomas threatens business partner. A history of rage." Below it was an audio file. I clicked play, my heart pounding. It was my voice, distorted and angry from nearly 15 years ago. I was shouting, using harsh language. "You think you can cheat me and get away with it? I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work in this town again." The clip was short, less than 30 seconds, and completely stripped of context. It was from a business deal gone wrong with a man who had tried to steal from our company. I had been furious, yes, but my anger was justified. He had been caught embezzling funds, but the article didn't mention that. It painted me as a violent, unstable man prone to terrifying outbursts. It was the perfect companion piece to their narrative about my unstable daughter and manipulative wife. They were building a picture of a dysfunctional, vengeful family. "Source close to the family says this is how Thomas has always been," the article read. "A bully who uses money and power to intimidate anyone who crosses him." "They must have paid that man a fortune for that recording," I said, my voice hoarse. Diane just stared at the screen, her face pale. This was different from the first article. This was my own voice, twisted into a weapon against me. It felt like a violation of my very identity. For a moment, the despair threatened to return, to swallow the small progress we had made. We had an army of friends, but what good were they against a lie that sounded so real? How could character witnesses compete with a recording of my own voice? But then Emily spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. "Who did you yell at, Dad?" she asked, her gaze steady. I told her the whole story about the partner, the theft, and how we had handled it legally afterward. She listened intently. "So you were right to be angry?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, he was a thief." She turned to her laptop. "Then we don't hide from it," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "We own it." She began writing an email to Peter, our lawyer. "We're going to give them the full story," she explained. "The context, the police reports from the embezzlement, everything. They want to use your past against you? Fine. We'll show them the whole picture, not just the ugly piece they stole." I looked at Diane, and this time we both smiled. The fear was still there, but it was being pushed back by pride. Our daughter wasn't just fighting, she was leading the charge. Peter called back less than 20 minutes after Emily hit send. The speed of his response told me everything. "This is brilliant," he said, his voice buzzing with a lawyer's energy. "Absolutely brilliant. We don't deny, We don't apologize. We reframe. We show the world they're dealing with a thief, and your anger was the righteous anger of a man who was robbed." He paused. "I know a journalist, a woman named Rebecca. She's tough but fair. She hates bullies. If we give her the exclusive with the police reports and a statement from you, she'll run the whole story. She won't just print their lies." It felt like the first real piece of good news we'd had in weeks. We were finally punching back, not just covering our faces. Our brief moment of victory was short-lived. The next morning, Frank called. His tone was grim. "I found the man from the recording, Thomas. His name is Douglas. He was the partner who embezzled from you, and Kenneth's people found him first." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "They've got him staying in a luxury hotel downtown. He's been telling people you threatened his family, that the embezzlement was a misunderstanding you blew out of proportion because of your temper. They hadn't just used my past. They were rewriting it. They took a proven criminal and were turning him into a sympathetic victim. They're going to put him on television, Thomas," Frank warned. "They're giving your angry voice a sad, frightened face to go with it." The attack was a 1-2 punch. While we were still processing the news about Douglas, an official courier arrived at the safe house. He handed me a thick envelope containing a legal notice. It was a motion filed by Kenneth's firm. They were petitioning the court for an emergency freeze on all my personal and business assets. The filing was a masterpiece of fiction. It used the audio clip as evidence of my unstable and vindictive nature. It claimed I was a flight risk, likely to hide money or flee the country to avoid judgment. They were using my own career, my life's work in finance, to paint me as a cornered criminal. It was a direct shot at my credibility, my livelihood, and our ability to even fund our own defense. Diane read the document over my shoulder, her hand trembling slightly. "They want to take everything," she whispered. The air went out of the room. Our army of friends and character witnesses suddenly felt very small. What good was a letter from a charity board against a court order that could leave us penniless? For the first time, I felt a tremor of true fear. They weren't just throwing mud. They were trying to burn our house down with us inside it. I sank into a chair, the legal papers feeling like a 50-pound weight in my hands. I had spent my life building a reputation for stability and integrity. In 48 hours, Kenneth had turned me into a raging, untrustworthy monster on the verge of financial ruin. I looked at my wife and daughter, their faces pale in the dim light of the dining room. The weight of my failure as a protector washed over me. I had let this monster into our lives by welcoming Spencer. I had been blind. But then Emily walked over and placed her hand on top of mine, covering the legal papers. Her touch was firm, steady. "No," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "This is what they want. They want us to panic. They want Dad to be so busy fighting for his money that we stop fighting for our name." She looked at me, her eyes just like her mother's but filled with a fire I had only just begun to appreciate. "They made a mistake, Dad. They think this is about money. They think they can scare you with numbers on a page." She turned and started pacing, the general mapping out her next move. "They're using a thief against you, a man who already has a criminal record for what he did to you. They think we don't know that. They think we'll be scared of the TV interview." She stopped and looked at me. "But we know who Douglas is, and if we know, Frank can find out more. What has he been doing for the last 15 years? Does he pay his taxes? Has he done this to anyone else?" She was right. We had been so focused on defending ourselves that we forgot the most basic rule of a fight. The best defense is a good offense. They were using a flawed weapon against us, and we could break it. I stood up, the fog of despair lifting. My daughter was teaching me how to fight. I grabbed my phone and dialed Frank. The weakness in my voice was gone, replaced by cold resolve. "Frank, change of plans," I said. "Forget the character witnesses for a day. I want you to dig into Douglas, the man from the audio clip. I want to know everything. I want to know every person he's wronged. Every dollar he's hidden, every lie he's told since he disappeared 15 years ago." I took a deep breath. "Kenneth gave us a gift. He put a convicted embezzler on a pedestal. I want you to kick it out from under him." The silence after I hung up with Frank was heavy. It was the silence of a chess game, where one wrong move could mean the end. We sat around the dining table, the legal papers from Kenneth still spread out like a threat. My daughter, Emily, had given us a new direction, a sense of purpose, but the fear was still there, a cold guest in the room. Diane reached over and squeezed my hand. Her touch was a silent promise. We are in this together. We spent the next 24 hours in a state of suspended animation. Every phone call made us jump. Every email notification felt like it could be the axe falling, telling us our accounts were frozen. The call came the following afternoon. It was Frank. I put him on speakerphone. "Thomas, you were right to send me down this rabbit hole," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "Douglas didn't just disappear. He changed his name twice and left a trail of broken promises across 3 states. My heart started beating faster. "What did you find?" I asked. He's a ghost when it comes to taxes, but he's very real when it comes to small-time scams, Frank explained. He specialized in promising older people high returns on their retirement savings, then vanishing with the money. I found at least 4 families he ruined. They all filed police reports, but he was always one step ahead. This was more than I could have hoped for. Douglas wasn't just a one-time embezzler. He was a career criminal. Kenneth hadn't vetted his star witness. He had just found a man with a grudge and thrown money at him, assuming his past was buried deep enough. There's more, Frank continued. His last known partner was a man named Arthur. They ran a home repair business. Douglas handled the money. He collected down payments for big projects and then disappeared, leaving Arthur to face the angry homeowners and the debt. The man lost everything. His business, his house, everything. Where is Arthur now? Emily asked, leaning closer to the phone. That's the tricky part, Frank admitted. He fell off the grid after the bankruptcy. I'm still digging. After we hung up, the mood in the room had shifted completely. The despair was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused anger. Kenneth had handed us the perfect weapon. They were about to put a serial con artist on national television and present him as a victim. Peter needs to know this immediately, I said, already reaching for my phone to call our lawyer. And Rebecca, she can run a story on Douglas's history before he even gets a chance to speak. But before I could dial, Diane's phone, sitting on the table, began to buzz. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, her voice cautious. Hello? There was a pause. She listened, her eyes widening. Yes, he is, she said, looking straight at me. Yes, I understand. Please, hold on. She covered the receiver with her hand, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. Thomas, you need to take this call, she whispered. It's a man named Arthur. He saw your name in the article about the audio clip. He says he's been looking for Douglas for 5 years. I took the phone, my hand trembling slightly. This is Thomas, I said. The voice on the other end was weary but firm. Mr. Thomas, my name is Arthur. I don't know you, but I know Douglas. I saw his name connected to yours online. That man didn't just steal from me. He destroyed my life. He told everyone I was the thief. He twisted everything. My throat felt tight. This poor man had gone through the same nightmare, but he'd gone through it alone. I'm so sorry for what happened to you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'm not calling for sympathy, Arthur said, a hard edge to his voice. I'm calling because I saw that they're trying to do the same thing to you. They're going to put him on TV to cry about how you wronged him. I can't let him do that to another person. He took a shaky breath. I have documents, bank statements showing the money he stole. I have emails where he admits to taking the funds before he vanished. I have everything. If you are fighting him, I want to fight with you. I looked at Diane and Emily. Their faces were shining with tears of relief. It was a miracle. We hadn't needed Frank to find Arthur. Justice, it seemed, was knocking on our door. Arthur, I said, my own voice breaking. You have no idea what this means. Yes, we are fighting, and we would be honored to fight alongside you. We arranged to have Frank pick him up and bring him to a safe location to meet with our lawyer, Peter. When I ended the call, the room was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the calm before a storm we were finally ready to unleash. Kenneth thought he was controlling the narrative, but he had no idea that the past was coming for him, and it had a name, it had a voice, and it had proof. The next few hours were a blur of nervous energy. Frank arrived with Arthur about 2 hours after the call. I opened the door to a man who looked like he'd been carrying the weight of the world for years. Arthur was in his late 50s, with tired eyes but a firm handshake. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to run from one either. He carried a worn leather briefcase like it was a sacred object. We sat him down at the dining table, the same table where we had felt so hopeless just a day before. Diane made him a cup of coffee, her hands steady now. Arthur opened his briefcase and laid out the contents. It was exactly as he'd said. There were bank statements showing large deposits into an account Douglas controlled, followed by a single massive withdrawal that emptied it. There were printed emails where Douglas blamed suppliers for delays, all while promising Arthur that the client's money was safe. The most damning piece of evidence was a short, handwritten note. Had to go. The money will fix things. Don't look for me. It read. It was Douglas's handwriting. Arthur had kept it for 5 years. He made me look like the fool and the thief, Arthur said, his voice low. I lost my business. My wife left me. I've been working odd jobs ever since, just trying to stay afloat. I felt a surge of cold fury, not just for what Douglas had done to me, but for what he'd done to this man. He didn't just steal money, he stole lives. Peter and Rebecca arrived shortly after. I watched our lawyer's eyes scan the documents. A slow, predatory smile spread across Peter's face. Thomas, this isn't just a shield, he said, tapping the handwritten note. This is a sword, a very, very sharp one. Rebecca, our journalist friend, was already taking notes, her expression intense. She looked up from her notepad. The TV station is promoting this interview with Douglas as a major exclusive. The man betrayed by a titan of finance. They're building a narrative of a powerful man crushing the little guy. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with mine. We can destroy that narrative before it even airs. Arthur's story is 10 times more compelling. It's real. It has proof. The plan began to form right there at our dining room table. It was simple, elegant, and brutal. We weren't going to wait for Kenneth's attack. We were going to launch our own. Peter would use Arthur's affidavit and evidence to file an emergency countermotion, accusing Kenneth's firm of knowingly presenting a fraudulent witness to the court. He would argue that their entire case was built on the testimony of a career criminal. It won't just get your assets unfrozen, Peter explained. It could open Kenneth up to sanctions for misleading the court. While Peter prepared the legal assault, Rebecca would handle the public one. She would write an in-depth article, complete with copies of the evidence Arthur provided. She would tell the story of a serial con artist named Douglas, who ruined lives and was now being paid to lie on national television. She would frame it as a story of media manipulation, with Kenneth and his client Spencer pulling the strings. We publish it the morning of the interview, Rebecca said, her voice sharp as glass. By the time Douglas sits in that chair, every reporter in the country will have my article. The interviewer will have to ask him about Arthur. He won't be prepared. Kenneth won't be prepared. We'll turn their big moment into a public execution. The room was filled with a dangerous energy. Emily was smiling, a real, fierce smile. They thought Dad was the target, she said. They never even thought to check their own weapon. She was right. Kenneth, in his arrogance, had assumed Douglas was just a disgruntled employee with an old grudge. He hadn't bothered to look deeper. He had armed a man without checking if the gun was loaded, and now we were going to turn it around and point it right back at him. That night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I slept. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was the sleep of a soldier before a battle he finally believes he can win. The next morning, we put the plan into motion. Frank took Arthur to a hotel to keep him safe and help him write his official statement for the court. Peter and his team worked through the night, drafting the legal filings. Rebecca locked herself in her office, writing the article that would be our first cannon shot. Diane, Emily, and I stayed at the safe house, a command center buzzing with phone calls and emails. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. We were no longer the victims in this story. We were the hunters. The interview was scheduled for the following evening. The clock was ticking, and for the first time, it felt like it was ticking in our favor. Kenneth was about to learn a very hard lesson. When you build your house on a foundation of lies, it doesn't take much to bring the whole thing crashing down. The morning air was thick with anticipation. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting. At exactly 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. It was just a link. No words were needed. I clicked on it, and there it was. Her article, splashed across the homepage of a major news outlet. The headline was devastatingly simple. Key witness in Spencer case exposed as serial con artist. Attorney Kenneth accused of negligence. Below it was a picture of Douglas, looking smug, next to a scanned copy of the handwritten note he'd left for Arthur. It was a masterpiece of journalism, laying out the entire story, piece by painful piece. It told of Arthur's ruined life, complete with bank statements and damning emails. Within minutes, the story was everywhere. It was being shared on social media, picked up by other news blogs. My phone started ringing, then Diane's, then Emily's. It was a flood of support from friends and colleagues who had been forced to stay silent. They had seen the initial news about me and Spencer, but now they saw the truth. Peter called around 9. "The motion is filed, Thomas," he said, his voice buzzing with energy. I attached Rebecca's article as Exhibit A. The judge's clerk called me not 10 minutes ago. They are very interested in the evidence. Kenneth is about to have a very, very bad day. The legal gears were turning, but the real show was yet to come. The TV interview was still on. The rest of the day was a long, slow crawl toward evening. We couldn't eat. We couldn't sit still. We paced the safe house like caged animals watching the clock. We knew the TV station wouldn't cancel the interview. It was now an even bigger story. They weren't just interviewing a supposed victim. They were interviewing a man at the center of a national scandal. At 8 p.m., we gathered in front of the television. The show's host, a famous journalist named Richard, introduced the segment with a serious expression. Tonight, we have an exclusive interview with Douglas, the man who claims his life was ruined by finance giant Thomas. But this morning, new information has come to light that paints a very different picture. My heart pounded in my chest. There he was, Douglas, sitting in the chair opposite Richard, looking a little less confident than he did in the article's photo. The studio lights made the sweat on his forehead shine. The first few questions were soft. Richard let him tell his practice story, the one where he was a loyal employee betrayed by a cruel boss. Douglas relaxed a little, falling into his role. I could see the lies forming on his lips, the same kind of lies that had destroyed Arthur's life. He was believable. I felt a flicker of fear. What if people believed him? Then, Richard leaned forward, holding up a printout of Rebecca's article. "Mr. Douglas, I want to ask you about another man, a man named Arthur, your former business partner." The change in Douglas was instant and dramatic. The color drained from his face. His confident posture collapsed. He stammered, I don't know who you're talking about." Richard didn't let up. "You don't? Because he says you do. He says you stole over $100,000 from your shared business, disappeared, and left him to face bankruptcy and ruin. We have copies of bank statements right here." Douglas started to panic. He looked off camera, probably searching for Kenneth, his puppet master. "That's a lie. It's all lies. Thomas is paying him to say this," but his voice was shaky. his eyes wide with fear. Richard then held up the handwritten note. "Is this your handwriting, Mr. Douglas?" It reads, "Had to go. The money will fix things. Don't look for me." Arthur kept this for 5 years. The camera zoomed in on Douglas's face. He was trapped. There was no escape. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just sat there, exposed in front of millions of people, the carefully constructed mask of a victim shattered into a million pieces. The interview was abruptly cut short, going to a commercial break. In the living room, there was silence, then a sob. It was Emily, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Diane wrapped her arms around her, and I joined them, holding my family tight. We had won. It wasn't just a legal victory or a public relations win. We had taken the ugly, twisted narrative they had built and demolished it with the simple, powerful force of the truth. On the screen, a panel of experts was already dissecting the disastrous interview. They showed a shot of Kenneth, who had been in the studio, rushing out a side door, hiding his face from the cameras. He was no longer the predator. He was the prey, and his own weapon had just blown up in his face. The storm we had been waiting for had finally broken, and it was washing everything clean. My daughter's wedding was on the line, and I chose to act. What did you think of my decision to freeze his account? Subscribe for more intense stories like mine.